Yeah, what up, what up, what up? Welcome in, welcome back. Thank you for taking the time out to join me. It is I, Bruce Hope, host of the Format Podcast. And here you are with me to take a little while, kick it, and listen to me wax poetic, talk a little bit about some college football and NFL, which we know is king in the United States. All right, so today is a football day. Basketball's not back yet, but it's football season anyway. So even when basketball comes back, we're going to do some talking about it, but the focus, of course, is going to be on college football and the NFL. So before we get to that, let's go ahead and knock out the what? Particulars. You know what it is. So first and foremost, thank you for checking in on the show. If you're on YouTube, obviously you know where you can find us. But if someone sent you the link or you were just kind of screwing around and it somehow managed to pop up on your timeline, if you're looking for us in the future, just type in the Format Podcast. We should pop right up and you can go ahead and watch. All right. Do me a favor. Click that red subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate that. Also, go ahead and click that bell so you can make sure you're alerted to when new episodes come up so that you can get that new content as soon as I drop it. And finally, if after the show you like what you heard, go ahead and click that like button. I'm not that guy that's going to ask you to click the likes. If you didn't like it, that's not me. So if you like it, go ahead, click it. Appreciate that. Next up, if you want the audio only podcast, well, that's fine, because we are available anywhere you get your audio podcasts. That's going to be iTunes, Spotify, Podbean Podcast, Overcast, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. And we're also available on iHeartRadio. So just go to any one of those, type in the Format Podcast. We should pop right up. Also, when you're listening to your audio podcast, if you can, go ahead and please rate. Give us that 5-star review. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give us that 5 stars. All right. It helps us to continue to rise in the algorithm. You know, I don't know all the technical stuff about it, but it helps us continue to rise and just overall better for the show. And it lets me know you appreciate the hard work I'm putting in to give you a quality product and not just sit here regurgitating stuff that I hear from everybody else or parroting popular narratives. Because again, that also isn't me. All right. What else we got? Also, if you want to reach out to me on social media, I really appreciate that. It lets me know you're listening. Even if you disagree with things I said, that's fine. We can debate. We could talk about it. If you think I'm the biggest idiot talking sports, you think I'm the biggest genius, I appreciate all of that. So you can catch me on Twitter at Bruce F.A. Hope. That's at Bruce F.A. Hope. You can find me on Instagram at The Format Podcast, at The Format Podcast. You can also email me directly, theformatpodcast@outlook.com, theformatpodcast@outlook.com. All right, so there we go. You know what time it is. Sit back, relax, and listen up to episode 106 of The Format. All right, let's get it. So you know what I like to do when we're talking football before I get to the NFL, the quote unquote proverbial big boys. I like to talk some college football because I love college football just as much, maybe if not more, than I love the NFL. Or maybe it's just I love the fact that there's so many more games available to me to watch in college on Saturdays than there are on Sundays if I don't have the NFL pack, right? It really is cool that there's so many college football games on. I can't even get through them all. Of course, you know, by now, if Notre Dame's playing, that's the game I'm watching primarily, but that's a different story entirely. So let's go ahead and get to it when we're talking some college football. All right. So, listen, last week was pretty eventful. And the biggest reason why was probably the result of the Alabama-Florida game. Now, obviously, you know me, you listen to this pod, or you don't, but you know me anyway. You know my feelings on college football. I am not an SEC guy. That said, that game, Bama and Florida, was the CBS SEC game of the week, and for a pretty good reason. Let's be real here, right? Two of the best teams in the country. Yeah, I said it. Two of the best teams in the country. Obviously, Bama is the best team in the country. Florida, highly ranked. I think they came in at either number 10 or 11, I think number 10. So, a top 10 matchup between two really outstanding teams, well coached, a lot of talent on both sides, right? Okay. Alabama, in most people's eyes, like my own, is the best team in the country without question. They're ranked number one. And going into that game, they looked like the unbeatable buzzsaw that they had presented themselves as for the first 2 weeks of the season. Florida was ranked number 10. I was right about that. They were ranked number 10. And for most people, myself included, I saw them maybe trying to hang in there for the first quarter and then just getting blown away with, Alabama's superior coaching and talent. But that was not to be. While the Tide won, and they did keep on rolling. You see what I did there? Roll Tide, right? No, I'm not actually saying Roll Tide for those of you listening and wondering, oh my God, Bruce said Roll Tide. No, I'm not actually saying Roll Tide. I'm just playing with the words. See, the Crimson Tide kept on rolling. Roll Tide, right? So I'm saying that to explain it. So if anyone hears that, no, I'm not actually saying Roll Tide. Anyway, they were rolling, right? After the first quarter, Bama was up 21-3. And I think I actually tweeted something along the lines of this game is going to get out of hand. I think I retweeted somebody's tweet saying that the game was on pace to have a final score of 84-12. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen no matter what the outcome was. But at the end of the day, it was far from that, right? So Bama's up 21-3 at the end of the first. And then a lot of things changed, right? Credit to the Gators. They deserve it. They outscored Alabama 26-10 the rest of the way in this game, but they still came up short. They lost 31-29 in a thriller. And for me, I think one of the most interesting things there is that Bama did not win the game the way they usually do, okay? Freshman phenom Bryce Young, redshirt freshman. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't remember what class he's in, but first-year starter Bryce Young had another great game, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers. But Alabama only rushed for 91 yards as a team. That's highly unusual, right? Meanwhile, even more unusual than that, they gave up 245 on the ground. And that is very unlike a Nick Saban coach team. And I'm sure that he ripped them a new one after that game and really, went hard in practice this week because Saban is a guy who's always looking for something on which to improve, even after wins. He's like making up little things to harp on. But, this week he really has a lot that he can work on. So I'm sure he's happy about that, right? Not happy that they almost lost, but happy that he has a reason to really coach hard this week. And as much as I'm not a Saban guy, that's one of the reasons that he is arguably the best coach in college football history. I think for most people, that's not an argument. For me, I can always find somewhere to make a little argument, but I think it's safe to say that he's probably the best coach in college football history. And all these championships kind of, they make it real hard to argue against that, right? Anyway, at the end of the day, Bama found a way to do what great teams do, and that is win football games, right? And that is where I get irritated. So some of you might have seen my Twitter and Instagram posts talking about this, right? So let me tell you, here's where I am on it, right? If this isn't your first time hearing me talk about college football, then as I mentioned earlier, I am not a fan of the SEC. Why? Not because I hate good football. Why? Not because I don't believe that they're the best conference in the country. No. I am not a fan of the SEC because of the blatant hypocrisy and fan and media bias that comes along with that conference and the attitude that no one else in the country plays college football, right? So after number 10 Penn State beat number 22 Auburn in a whiteout at Happy Valley on Saturday night. By the way, is it me or does a whiteout look like one of the freaking coolest things on sports and TV? I just think it's awesome. And, that might be a new bucket list item for me. One of my I guess I have three bucket list items for college football now. I've been to Florida, Georgia. I was lucky enough to be able to actually sit in the press box and cover that. That was freaking amazing. I think 2019. Um, but I think my next three bucket item list for college football are one. I got to get to a Notre Dame home football game, just any home game. Obviously, a big one would be better, but Notre Dame at home is just that would be something special for me. I would love to get to Madison, Wisconsin, and be there for a Badgers game at the start of the fourth quarter when they do the jump around, because I've just heard that's something incredible. And finally, I would love to do a whiteout night game at Penn State. So I've got some bucket list items, and I never even thought about it. That's interesting that two of my bucket list items are Big Ten, or all three are in the Big Ten footprint. But anyway, back to my irritation. So after Penn State beat Auburn in that whiteout, I made a post basically saying that, and again, this isn't new. We need to stop acting like without Alabama, the SEC is just so superior as a conference and better than anyone else. Now, that's not saying that there aren't other good teams in the conference. What that's saying is, let's be real here. All these championships they've won. Bama has won 6 out of the last 12 national championships. Take Alabama away from the conference, and suddenly they're a lot closer to the pack. That's not a ridiculous take, is it? That's not. And let me break that down for you, okay? Okay. Let's be real. The Gators haven't won since Tim Tebow was their quarterback. That was a long time ago. I think that last championship was 2008, right? Okay. So at least they have 2 championships this century. That's cool. But still, it's been a long time. Was that 13 years now since they won? LSU is always loaded with talent, but they only won once in a flash in the pan season with Joe Brady as the OC. So now people are saying to me, who's Joe Brady? Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator now in the NFL, the Carolina Panthers, right? So people are going to say, what about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and those guys, right? Okay, yeah, fantastic team. I think that championship team from LSU sent like 14 guys to the NFL that year. It was crazy. But the fact is, they had that same roster the year prior. Joe Brady arrives, they set records, they win a championship. Joe Brady leaves, they're in the toilet. Common denominator, Joe Brady. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that LSU won a championship that year. That was an all-time great team. I get it. But again, they always have talent. The talent is always up there, but they rarely win. Okay? Next. Auburn. Auburn has one title, and that was a flash in the pan year with Cam Newton. That was arguably one of the single greatest years of any player in college football history. How many other players can we name from that team? I'll wait. Exactly. Crickets, Jeopardy music, whatever you want to use, right? So the fact is, and that's a team that's always got a superior level of talent, but how often do they actually do something, right? In terms of having being a great postseason team, right? We don't really see it, right? Okay. Matter of fact, 2017, that Auburn team that was really good played in the SEC championship game, lost to Georgia. During the regular season, they beat Georgia and Alabama in back-to-back weeks. Incredible team, right? Not so much, because when they played UCF in Atlanta in the Peach Bowl, they lost that game. Okay, so let's not just Auburn, mighty SEC. Okay, great. All right, next up, Georgia. Georgia is always ranked high, consistently in the top 5 recruiting classes under Kirby Smart. But guess what? What have they won? Okay, people say, Bruce, you're a Notre Dame fan. Notre Dame hasn't won anything since 1988. You're absolutely right. 100% right. Can't argue that. Notre Dame has not won a national championship since 1988. Notre Dame is just not good enough. Fact. I'm still a diehard Notre Dame fan, but fact, Notre Dame is just not good enough. So why did I bring up Notre Dame? Because Georgia, one of the quote-unquote standard bearers in the SEC, the team that everyone says is so great, consistently has top 5 recruiting classes, right? I believe they've averaged like 2.5 in terms of their ranking under Kirby Smart in recruiting classes, right? They haven't won a national championship since 1982. So don't tell me about Notre Dame not having won since 1988 when Georgia hasn't won since 1982. Simple math, people. Simple math, people. Okay, got it. Now, there's no need to even talk about Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Mizzou, South Carolina, Tennessee, or Vanderbilt. Traditionally doormat programs, but because they're in the SEC, they get credit for being some fantastic programs. No, the SEC is carried, of course, by Alabama, right? I just explained to you why, even though Georgia's really good, they should not get the credit that they get. Florida, really good, probably should not get as much credit as they get. But the fact of the matter is, they're SEC. They've got the media behind them. They've got the fans behind them. Let's just stop acting like no one else in college football plays college football. That's where I get irritated, okay? So you take Alabama out of there, and this conference is suddenly a lot closer to the pack, okay? There's a lot of bad teams in the SEC, all right? You take away Bama, suddenly that conference doesn't look so dominant. Narratives are very powerful. And that's only the first thing that pissed me off. Yep, there's something else. Go figure. So, Florida went into the Bama game ranked number 11. They lost. They ended up ranked, you guessed it, number 11. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson all won. And not one of those teams moved in the rankings. It is ridiculous. I've said it time and time again. And if you know me or you've listened, you know how I feel about this, and I've broken it down. SEC teams are not judged the same way that other teams are. They can lose and not be penalized. They win and they see bigger jumps. And teams from outside the conference that beat SEC teams get big jumps. Why is that? Because they beat a team from the mighty, mighty SEC. Give me an example of that, Bruce. That's what you say. Okay, guess what? Penn State was number 10. They beat number 22 Auburn. Auburn was number 22, which means 21 teams nationally were ranked better than them. And what happened when Penn State beat them? Penn State jumped 4 spots. Why? Because Auburn's in the SEC. So the narrative is, if you beat an SEC team, you must be really freaking good. Man, cut that out. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The bias that SEC teams and that whole conference get. If you're Bama, I get it. I get it. If you're anybody else in that conference, earn it. Show it. That's it. That's it. Okay, but that's not the focus of this episode. I know you think it probably was, but it's not. I just had to vent for a minute because it drives me crazy. Anyway, I mentioned Notre Dame earlier. So, we're talking college football. We've got to talk arguably the biggest national brand in college football. And I know some people are going to want to argue that, but let's be real here. What is a bigger national brand in college football than the University of Notre Dame? You can simply check the TV rankings for any big game Notre Dame has. That's all. Anyway, speaking of Notre Dame, big game coming up for them this weekend. And they've got the 12 o'clock game this Saturday against Wisconsin. I'm surprised it's actually not the night game. That's what it was scheduled to be last year, but COVID, of course, knocked that out. There wasn't interconference play for most teams last year. I don't know if there was for anybody, but that was supposed to be a night game at Soldier Field in Chicago. But it's still going to be at Soldier Field in Chicago, but it's going to be the 12 o'clock noon kickoff game for the Big Ten. And we know that's a big one. It's one of the biggest games of the weekend, if not the biggest. And I'm not saying that because I'm a fan of Notre Dame. I'm saying that because there's only 2 ranked matchups this weekend, and Notre Dame, Wisconsin is one of them. ESPN Game Day, their pregame show, and Fox Big Noon Kickoff will both be at Soldier Field for that game doing their pregame shows. And again, it should be one of the 2 best games of the weekend. The only other ranked college football matchup is Texas A&M versus Arkansas. So can't say this is going to be a great college football weekend, but college football is always great. A couple quick notes I wanted to touch on. I didn't make notes about, but is Michigan State for real? Mel Tucker's got those guys really balling. They're running it. They're throwing it. They're playing solid defense. They're really good. They probably won't be tested till late October against Michigan. Speaking of Michigan, is Michigan really good? They haven't necessarily been tested yet. I think they play this week against Rutgers. That shouldn't be a test either, but they're blowing people out of the water. Could this be the year in a season when Ohio State looks like they could be vulnerable, that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan get that elusive win against their arch rival, the Buckeyes, right? Um, who knows? But we have seen Michigan really look like a buzzsaw, really getting busy, having tremendous defenses and all that in years past. And when it came down to the Ohio State game, they couldn't get the job done. So we got a long way to go before we get there. But let's see what Michigan is. They look good. Um, who knows what it's going to be? Obviously, big matchups down the road against Michigan State, in-state little brother rivalry game, and of course, the game at the end of the season against Ohio State. Also, Penn State. Penn State looks like they're really good. Their defense looks great. The offense hasn't necessarily clicked quite just yet. They're still working in a new air raid system, but the defense looks fantastic. They will, being in the Big Ten East, they will at some point, I don't know which week the game is in, but they will play Ohio State. That obviously is going to be a serious barometer of what they are or are not this season, even though, again, Ohio State doesn't quite look like itself, especially after being physically manhandled against Oregon a couple weeks ago. Yeah, so that's it for college this week. Definitely some good stuff going on. Not a huge week in terms of big name matchups, but again, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, and Texas A&M versus Arkansas. But by the way, quick note: I mentioned Arkansas among my bad teams in the bottom of the SEC. I know they're 3-0, but Arkansas has been bad forever, right? So it's very interesting to see what Arkansas is doing. We'll see who comes out on top of this Arkansas A&M matchup this weekend. But yeah, they're still on my bad teams in the SEC. All right. So, unless they go 9-3 or 10-2 this year, they'll still be there because traditionally they're a bad team. Anyway, that's it for college football right now. We'll get to the NFL in a minute. So here we are, time for the big boys, the NFL. And before I get into it, and I have 5 games I want to discuss this week. I know I did 6 last week, so I think the number of games I'm going to discuss each week is going to be fluid depending on, which ones caught my interest the most or which ones I thought had the most interesting storylines. So this week it's 5. Who knows? Could be 4 next week. Could be 7. Who knows, right? It'll just be depending on, kind of how each week plays out and which games were really, I thought, super interesting or competitive, or maybe not so much, but there was just something going on that got my attention. Okay. So before I go ahead and get into this week's top 5 games that I thought were worthy of discussion, I wanted to make some general commentary on some things that I saw and some things that I was thinking about. Right. So it's really hard to talk NFL without talking to Cowboys, right? I'm not one of those guys that believes that you have to talk Cowboys every week because I just don't find them that compelling for the most part, even though they are technically America's team. And let's be real here, in NFL discussion, they are a driver of attention, right? People want to hear about the Cowboys. And I'm not going to talk about them now because people want to hear about them, just because, I did think I found something interesting, right? So let's get to that a little bit, right? So obviously, Cowboys played the Chargers over the weekend, and they got the win, but they did it by going away from what they've been trying to do for a while. What do I mean by that? Obviously, we know Dak Prescott became the richest quarterback, I think the richest player in NFL history this past offseason when Jerry Jones pretty much gave him everything he wanted, paid him everything. I think Dak is going to make a total of like $75 million this year alone, which is crazy, right? But even still, we saw at the beginning of last year, first 4 or 5 games before he got injured. And then the opening game this year, the Cowboys have really been airing it out, just, throwing the ball all over the yard. They've beefed up the receiving core, obviously. They got a lot of talent there, a lot of speed, a lot of great hands. And so I'm kind of curious with that to know what's the focus behind that. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but is it a function of, okay, Dak's making all this money, we have to show why he's making all this money? Is it a function of Jerry Jones loves for the Cowboys to be a show almost more than he loves for the Cowboys to win? Is it a function of Kellen Moore, the Cowboys offensive coordinator, is trying to get a head coaching job, and a sexy, explosive passing game generally seems to be the way to do that in today's modern NFL? What is that about, right? But at the end of the day, Cowboys got their first win of the season. They're 1-1 so far this year. But how did they do it? They didn't throw the ball all over the yard, right? Dak was uber efficient. 23 of 27 passes he completed for 237 yards. So you say, well, this is the modern NFL. Dak only threw for 237 and the Cowboys still won. Well, how did they do that? Well, I'll tell you. They ran the football, you know what it is, for 198 yards. Okay. They ran the football for 198 yards. And what does that mean? If you listen to this pod, you know what it is. It gets right back to my simple football mantra: the easy way to win. You could probably even put this in football for dummies. You ready? Run the ball, stop the run. Run the ball, stop the run. One more time. One more time. Run the ball, stop the run. It is literally that simple. I know the running back position isn't as respected anymore. I know it's not sexy, and they will tell you that you can't win just by running the ball, but you can have a heck of a lot of success that way. If your defense is good enough and your running game is good enough, you still can win that way. Russell Wilson won his Super Bowl that way, right? With a dominant defense and a dominant run game and a quarterback who could make plays when necessary, but didn't have to throw for 300 or 400 yards every game, right? You can still do that. Run the ball, stop the run. Anyway, so you look at the game and you see that the Cowboys ran for 198 yards, and a couple of interesting notes pop out from that. And the first thing is Ezekiel Elliott may not be the dominant running back he once was, right? And, what is this, his fifth year in the league? So he probably, well, theoretically, he should be entering his physical prime, right? We saw him at this point, was 27 years old, maybe 28. So, 27 to 30, 31 in running back years, that's the prime, right? So he should be perfect. We saw him come into the season in the best shape that he's pretty much ever been in since he came into the league. So he's ready, but he just looks different, right? In this game against the Chargers, he had 16 carries for 71 yards, which is not terrible, but they were tough yards, in between the tackles yards. Take the hit and get a little extra, right? But he's not looking as explosive as he once did, even though, again, he came in tremendous shape. Now, part of that has to be that the Cowboys' offensive line has aged and is not nearly the dominant unit that it was earlier in his career. You have better run blocking units like the one in Baltimore, the one in Cleveland, the one in Tennessee. Derrick Henry plays a huge role there. And of course, we'll talk about him a little later. But the point is the Cowboys' O-line is not what it once was, and neither is Zeke. So now you look and you see Tony Pollard, the lightning of the Thunder and Lightning, which would be Zeke and Pollard. And he was the big hitter in this game. He had 13 carries for 109 yards, and he really showed that burst. I think he averaged almost 8 yards a carry, like 7.7 yards a carry in that game. So it is very interesting. And I guess the question is, what do we expect from Zeke going forward? Is it a situation where he's still young enough and hasn't had major injuries that maybe if they can retool or revamp this O-line a little bit, he can get back to, the Zeke that we knew in his first 3 years? Is it a function of he'll never get back to that because the Cowboys are determined to throw it a lot more because they're paying Dak $40 million a year. So he's not going to just turn around and hand it off every play, right? Even though if you want to win, what do? Run the ball and stop the run. But it's very interesting to see, what is Zeke going to be? Can he get back to some semblance of his former All-Pro self? I don't think he's that far off, but you can clearly see a decline, that he's not the same guy. So, like I like to say a lot in sports and on this pod, it'll be interesting to see. Kind of just got to wait, see how it plays out. All right. Number two, really interesting thought, right? Tennessee can be really dangerous this year. Why can Tennessee be really dangerous this year? I talked about them in the first game. They looked really bad, but now when you think about it, and then you saw kind of what they did to Seattle, and we'll talk about that a little later, they have a beast in running back, arguably the best running back in the league, and Derrick Henry. They have 2 number 1 wide receivers. And, what do you do there if you're a defense, right? And what do you do there? Do you try to take the pass away and let Derrick Henry gash you? Do you put 8 in the box and then they go over the top with play action or with just direct passing game? I don't know, but Tennessee can be really dangerous this year if they can put it together. Arthur Smith is gone, the former OC, now head coach of the Falcons. So, they were able to put a very good game together on Sunday against the Seahawks, where they won. So we'll see what's the deal with Tennessee. Okay, final interesting thought. I'm going to say names of two quarterbacks that probably have zero in common, but one probably affects the other much more than we would think. So you're probably sitting there like, Bruce, who are you talking about? Okay. I'm talking about Carson Wentz and Lamar Jackson. Nothing in common, right? Carson Wentz has a big arm, probably, probably a cannon, maybe not quite, Josh Allen, but a very big arm. He's mobile, but nothing like Lamar. You know, Lamar obviously is black. Carson Wentz is white. Just two totally different styles of players, right? Two totally different styles of players, two totally different styles of offenses, play the game completely differently. So then why am I mentioning these two together? And which one affects the other much more than we would think? Well, they have nothing in common, as I just mentioned. But the one who affects the other a lot more than we would think is Carson Wentz affecting Lamar Jackson. How would this Carson Wentz affect Lamar Jackson much more than we'd think? Carson Wentz, a few years ago, the year that Philadelphia won the Super Bowl, he had them in his first 13 games firmly entrenched in that number one spot in the NFC. And he was in position, had he not been injured, to win his MVP award, right? Now, Lamar Jackson is a unanimous MVP. He's got one of those. But based off of what Philadelphia saw that 1 year from Carson Wentz, they went ahead, even though he was injured, and inked him to a huge contract. What does that mean? He has been suffering from injuries ever since, and he has not been the same player that looked like an MVP during that 13 game stretch. Okay. And so what does that mean? That means Lamar Jackson may not get the money that he's looking for from Baltimore. Why would he not get the money he's looking for from Baltimore? Because so far he has managed to stay healthy, but his style historically has led to injuries with quarterbacks, right? Now, he's extremely mobile, probably the most mobile quarterback we've ever seen. He can make throws on the move. Watching him play is like a video game in terms of the way he can juke guys, leave defenders looking silly all over the field. But at the same time, even though he's not a small guy, he's considerably bigger than a Michael Vick, even though he's faster. He's not a guy that necessarily always avoids contact. Now, if he's by the sideline, you'll see him run out, but he takes some hits he doesn't always need to take. In the other night, the game against Kansas City, great game, by the way, and we'll talk about that as well. Um, you know, he was wide open, could have just run into the end zone, did a flip into the end zone, landed on his hip. Now, obviously, he wasn't injured, but who knows what can happen in these type of situations. So now you look and you say, is Baltimore going to be hesitant to give him the big money and then be caught in a situation like Philadelphia was, where you're paying him all this money, you're on the hook, it's damaging to your cap, but he's hurt all the time, and then they regret it? I don't know, especially since they built their entire offensive system around what this guy does well, right? The entire scheme. So you have to wonder, is Carson Wentz's deal really going to affect Lamar Jackson? And I really think that it may. Also, he doesn't have an agent to negotiate this with, so we will see how it plays out. Obviously, I hope he gets paid. Football is a game where any play can be the last of your career. So based on what he's done so far, I mean, he should make more money than Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott's never been an MVP. Dak Prescott also only has one playoff win, right? Lamar now has a playoff win. He's been the unanimous MVP. He's been record setting. He has done the things that as a quarterback you do, and it gets you top of the line money, right? Reset the market money. And as I've said ad nauseum, I didn't think Dak was a guy who should have been able to reset the market, but he did. And since Lamar is better than him, well, then Lamar should reset it again. But again, I don't know that, number one, without an agent, and number two, based on his style of play, and number three, what we saw happen in Philadelphia, if Baltimore is going to be willing to do that. So who knows? Okay, now let's get to those five most interesting games of the week. A lot more close games this week than there were in week one. And, we are really seeing some great quarterback play in the NFL. This really may be the golden age of quarterback play in the NFL, even though I'm very cognizant of the fact that rules have made it a lot easier for quarterbacks and for receivers, and hence, a video game like offensive numbers, right? The defenses are literally handcuffed. You can't touch receivers, can't really hit quarterbacks. Everything rules wise skewed towards offense today. Like, I look at it, I'm a Ravens fan. The 2000 Baltimore Ravens, I believe, and are held by many people to be the best single season defense ever. They couldn't play today because they were so physical. They were knocking guys out of games left and right. They couldn't play today. The rules wouldn't allow it, right? But you look at it, and you have the way the rules are written and the way coaches are in terms of importing more collegiate type schemes and systems. You're seeing young quarterbacks being able to come into the league and be effective at a much earlier point in their careers than they were in the past. But I always say, we laud these quarterbacks today, and yes, they are great. They got to, learn all this stuff and synthesize all this information and make plays, et cetera, et cetera. But if you brought Dan Marino and John Elway and Joe Montana and these guys into today's NFL, you can't tell me they wouldn't go insane. I mean, yes, they were born when they were born. I get it. But you can't tell me they wouldn't go insane in terms of the numbers that they're putting up in a league where you can't hit them and you can't hit the receivers. Like, it would be nuts. Think about it. Dan Marino did over 5,000 yards and 48 touchdowns in 1984. 1984. Okay. That was a time when you could lay quarterbacks out. You could lay receivers out. You can't do any of that now. And I get it, safety and all that. But even more so than the safety, they know that the average fan, they being the powers that be, the NFL, they also know that the average fan wants a game in which there's a lot of points. It's high scoring. So what do? They handcuff the defense to make that possible. So, anyway, back to what I was saying. It probably really is the golden age of quarterbacks because you see a lot of outstanding quarterback play, and rules or no rules, it really is impressive to see. All right. So first game I want to talk about is the Bengals versus the Bears. And I won't get too much into it, but I think the biggest thing for me in this game was that Bears fans and the Bears media won't have to wait any longer to find out what they're going to get and when they're going to see Justin Fields. Andy Dalton got injured. Hope he gets well soon. He's got a knee injury. And Justin Fields came in. Now, he didn't play great. He showed flashes. I think he was like 6 of 13 for maybe like 70 yards or something like that. And what I took from that is we definitely saw that Matt Nagy and the Bears coaching staff did not try to overload him, only allowed him to throw 13 passes, let him run 10 times. So very balanced in terms of the play call, in terms of allowing him to use his legs to keep the Bengals off balance and to try to make plays when he needed to, because we know that Justin Fields is a guy that, as great as his tools are, he's still working on how quickly he processes things. So when you take a while to process things, you may also be a little more skittish in the pocket and be more quick to kind of get out of there and take off running. So that's in a way to be expected from a young athletic quarterback. So there's that. Joe Burrow on the other side, he had a bad game. He threw 3 picks, but we kind of got to expect that he's going to have some growing pains in terms of, number one, he's only in his second year. Number two, he's working his way back into football shape, and not necessarily shape like conditioning, but shape in terms of being on the field and playing after the knee injuries that he worked his way back from. So you're not going to expect every game to be a masterpiece, right? So the Bears end up winning that game 20-17. And now the questions come out. What do we really expect from Fields realistically? When Andy Dalton comes back, if he comes back, does he get the job back? What if Fields is playing well by then and showing things that Andy Dalton can't do, i.e. he's got a bigger arm? We know that already. i.e. he's much more mobile. We know that already. He's bigger and stronger. He's just probably more of an elite playmaker than Andy Dalton can be at this stage in his career, or maybe ever has been in the NFL, right? So at that point, what does he do? How does Matt Nagy handle a QB controversy? You probably don't bench the young kid, especially if he's playing well. And maybe even if he's not playing well, you let him work through it. But the problem is Matt Nagy is likely on the hot seat. So do you try to save your job, or what? What do you do there? It's a tough thing. So I want to see how that works out. I want to see what goes on with Justin Fields, because I am on the record saying coming into this season that I believe Justin Fields was the best quarterback in this bunch. Yes, that's correct. I believe he's better than Trevor Lawrence in terms of, I saw Trevor Lawrence in a situation in college where, yeah, he's got all the physical tools, but the ACC was so bad, and all his receivers were always running free. His teams 97% of the time had just such an insane talent advantage over the opposition that it was just too easy. But there's a long way to go. There's a lot of time to see how it's going to play out, who's going to have the better career. Obviously, situation, coaching, personnel, all that plays a tremendous role in a quarterback's success. So we'll see. And I like Fields a lot, always have. Look forward to seeing what he's going to do. Hope he's successful. All right. Second game. This one wasn't exciting or very close, but there's a couple of interesting storylines here. And that is the Saints versus the Panthers. The Panthers beat the Saints 26-7. So first, after week one, with Jameis Winston looking almost perfect in his start in New Orleans, in his first start for New Orleans against Green Bay, he just looked bad in week two, right? 111 yards only passing and 2 interceptions. And so the question is, did we kind of get ahead of ourselves with Jameis Winston and what he's become with Sean Payton, or maybe what he hasn't become with Sean Payton? Is he ever going to be able to get over the turnover bug? I mean, obviously, he's had a year to sit behind and learn from Drew Brees, learn how to prepare, learn how that scheme and that system works. A full offseason working with Sean Payton, et cetera, et cetera. Did we jump the gun a little too early, with the near perfect game last week, 5 touchdown passes, no picks, very efficient? I don't know. Because this week, again, he just looked bad. Is it just part of his DNA to turn the football over, to throw picks? I don't know. Again, I just don't know. But the real story here was Panthers quarterback Sam Darnold. Okay. Now, I've never been a big Sam Darnold guy, even going back to college. I think he kind of made his name and his rep off of that huge Rose Bowl win against Penn State. Other than that, I wasn't too impressed with him. Obviously, at USC, you're always going to have elite skill position talent around you. So, it's going to be what it's going to be. I thought he got drafted high. His first few years in New York with the Jets, not impressed, okay? Now, let's be real. I'm not even going to say I'm not impressed. In New York with the Jets, he stunk, right? So the question now is, was that lack of weapons around him? Was that lack of a quality system? Adam Gase, we've seen Adam Gase is just not that guy, all right? Despite the fact that he was the OC when Peyton Manning was breaking records in Denver. What did we see as a head coach in Miami from Adam Gase? Nothing. What did we see as a head coach with the New York Jets from Adam Gase? Nothing, okay? But back to Sam Darnold, 305 passing yards, 2 TDs, and 1 pick against the Panthers. Really nice outing. Early this season so far, he's playing some of the best football of his life. And let's be real about that. Again, only 2 games in, but these 2 games he's played really, really well. All right. So I guess the question is, what does it say about Adam Gase versus Matt Rule and Joe Brady and their ability to both scheme and coach and build something in Carolina? Now you're starting to hear, I've actually heard, which is crazy, after 1 year and 2 games, Joe Brady's name being mentioned as an up-and-coming hot possible head coaching candidate. Can we see some more, people? Can we see some more? But if he goes on to reinvent Sam Darnold and to really have Carolina having a really good offense, then we'll see that it wasn't just a fluke with LSU and them being able to out-talent everybody. Because, again, LSU's talent is always there. But when he got there, that talent took off. When he left, yeah, well, we saw what happened. Anyway, so let's look and see for the rest of the season if Sam Darnold's going to be able to continue this rebirth he's had, or is he just kind of on a hot streak right now? Rams and Colts, game 3. Matt Stafford didn't quite light it up like he did in week 1, but guess what? He was good enough to get a win. And really, that's all they care about. Number one is the fact that Matt Stafford is absolutely capable of making plays physically that Jared Goff could not make. And number 2, he's he's good enough to get wins, and he's got that thing. Okay. So yeah, Rams beat the Colts. And some interesting notes about that. Carson Wentz got hurt again with an injured ankle. That has to worry the Colts, right? Because this is the guy that they've got to pay, and they gave up 2 draft picks to the Eagles, and he can't stay healthy. I'm starting to wonder, is Carson Wentz snake bitten? Like, is he cursed? Did somebody make a voodoo doll and is hanging around somewhere sticking pins in this guy? He just can't seem to stay healthy. And even when he is healthy, he's turning the ball over a lot. So who knows? Jonathan Taylor, star running back for the Colts, he's off to another slow start to this season. He's got 32 carries for 107 yards in his first two games, averaging 3.3 yards a carry. This is a guy who can be a workhorse back. We saw that, later in the season last year for the Colts. But again, he's starting slow. Not sure why that is. The Colts obviously are going to need to be able to run the ball effectively and try to keep their starting quarterback healthy to be able to have success, right? I think one of the biggest single matchups we were all looking forward to seeing in this game was going to be all-pro defensive tackle for the Rams, Aaron Donald, lining up against all-pro guard Quentin Nelson for the Colts. Now, both of these guys are pretty much the best in the league at their positions, perennial all-pros, and that was supposed to be the matchup. Now, Quentin Nelson did a pretty good job keeping Aaron Donald in check for the most part when they were lined up, but the Rams were smart, and what they did was kind of move Aaron Donald around a bit, get him to the outside where he didn't have to match up directly against Quentin Nelson in order to have a little more success, try and create mismatches. Good move. Smart, right? Wasn't pretty overall, but the Rams are 2-0, and now the Colts are 0-2. And that's very bad news for the Colts. Why is that bad news for the Colts? Because in the last 30 years, only 12% of teams that have started the season 0-2 have made the playoffs. You don't want to start 0-2 because that pretty much damns your season. But we'll see. The NFC South is not a particularly tough division. So we'll see what they can do and how that ends up playing out. All right, game 4, Titans and Seahawks. For the first time, Pete Carroll has not, for the first time, Pete Carroll has lost a home opener with Russell Wilson. Think about that, right? Russell Wilson been in the league for a while. But if you look at the numbers, you say Russell Wilson got busy, right? No turnovers, 2 touchdowns, 343 passing yards. But now here's the problem. The Seahawks did not play like a Pete Carroll coach team. What do I mean when I say that? They only rushed the ball for 77 total yards, and Pete Carroll loves to try and be a run-first attack if he can. They didn't do what they're supposed to do, right? They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't stop the run, and we'll get to that. They let Derrick Henry get loose and punish them for 182 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns, right? So this is where it gets interesting. Ryan Tannehill threw for 347 yards on 68% completions, right? Pete Carroll is a defensive guy. One of the things he was known for since he got to Seattle, obviously he had the Legion of Boom. They're long gone, but still he's been known for having really good defenses, defensive backfield, etc., right? So you have Derrick Henry rushing for 182 yards, Ryan Tannehill throwing for 347. The Seahawks didn't take away anything from the Titans, and that's a problem, right? Why is that a problem? Because offensively, Tennessee had exactly what you want to see, and that's perfect balance, 40 runs and 40 passes. Perfect balance. You cannot win letting a team do everything they want to do. You either have to have a dominant defense that doesn't let them do anything, right? 2,000 Ravens, which is pretty near impossible in the modern NFL, right? Or you make a team play one-handed. You take away one thing and make them do all of the others so you can control that. See New England Patriots. But if you let a team have perfect balance and success, right? Running and throwing, then you're going to end up with what Seattle ended up with on Sunday, a loss. All right. Finally, Baltimore versus Kansas City. That was a heck of a game if you watched that on Sunday night, right? This game has already been broken down ad nauseum, and if you're listening to this, you're probably a football fan, so you've heard it all. So I'm not going to get into any in-depth breakdown. I'm just going to say, to me, it was absolutely incredible the way Lamar Jackson shook off 2 early interceptions and literally took the team on his back to beat the Chiefs for the first time as a starter, right? He is completely breaking the mold for what a quarterback can do and how a quarterback can win. Now, I'm not going to be prisoner of the moment and jump up and say, Lamar Jackson's the best quarterback in the AFC. He's not. He's probably the second best quarterback in the AFC, right? But he's not the best. He's not Mahomes yet. Okay. Now, if he can go through and win this Super Bowl, now we got a serious discussion on our hands, right? So He ran for over 100 yards and put the team on his back, like I said. And Baltimore is now 9-0 in games where Lamar Jackson rushes for 100 yards or more, right? So then you say to yourself, he can't possibly keep this up, right? But this is year 4, and we've been saying that since year 1, right? He can't possibly keep this up yet. But he hasn't seemed to have slowed down yet, which is interesting. And we keep saying every year, well, is this the year that we're going to see advancement in the passing game? But that offense doesn't seem to be built that way. Now, don't get me wrong, the offense and the organization is moving towards getting him more weapons. There's a lot of injuries right now with Baltimore. There's injuries in the receiving core. The first 3 string running backs are injured. There's injuries all over the defense. So that's playing a role, right? But I just want to see, I really do. I want to see more of, I don't want to see Lamar Jackson try to be a pure drop back passer because that's going to take away one of his most dangerous weapons. But I do need to see him throw it more, right? Now, if he can keep running like this, but not get hurt, which again that's a tall order historically, then keep doing it. I guess you say, dance with who brung you, right? I've heard that expression. So that is exactly what Lamar is doing. He's going to continue to do that, and so will the Ravens until somebody stops that from happening. But on the other hand, Lamar has to also be thinking, I'm always one play away from not getting that money that I've earned so far. So I don't even know how you weigh that out or how that should work, right? But at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson is doing incredible things. The Baltimore Ravens are doing incredible things. They have managed to avoid going 0-2. As I mentioned, since 1990, I believe, teams that start 0-2 only make the playoffs 12% of the time. And so you definitely want to avoid that hole. So now the Ravens are 500 again. They're back in business. And obviously their hopes are not to win a playoff game, but to win the Super Bowl. And yeah, I just want to say before I get out of here, the NFL is king. And there's a reason that the NFL is king. Just football is so amazing. And I'm not going to say there's not drama and there's not diva players and all of that stuff, but it's so much more of a team game. It's so much more of, even though I said that they've tried to really, handcuff the defense and try to take a lot of physicality out of the game, there's still that element of it that you can watch and you can enjoy. And it's just, and this is not to take a shot at the NBA, but it's just something different from the NBA in terms of what you're looking for and what you enjoy about sports. There's a lot less machinations in terms of, like stuff like super teams and all that. And not to get on a soapbox, but just it almost seems like the NFL, even though it has its own stuff going on, is more pure in the form of sports and the enjoyment of sports. So anyway, enjoy your weekend coming up in terms of college football and professional football. It's going to be more good stuff. And yeah, I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in. And remember, like I said, click that subscribe button, click that bell so you can be notified. And if you enjoyed the show, click that like button. Thanks so much. Have a good one.